Good afternoon, buenas tardes, bienvenidos a ¿Qué pasa, Mujer? Good afternoon and welcome to ¿Qué pasa, Mujer? We're here every Sunday at 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Today we're a little bit mobile on my end. Vanikte is here with us as well. Maddie's not here with us because she's with her daughter that's pregnant and she's had some complications, not complications, but she's just being taken care of by mom. So we could go ahead and bring Nikte on. Today, we're going to have a nice conversation about culture and race. And those are pretty much it. Just, what our show is about, right? Que pasa, mujer? And we just choose to kind of talk about different aspects of life and how we see things because we are all so different and have different perspectives of life. ¿Cómo estás, mujer?
Buenas tardes, mujer. I still feel like I have to check. I'm like, wait, I'm still in the afternoon. Buenas
Yeah.
tardes. ¿Cómo estás?
Bien, ¿y tú?
Bien, gracias. Aquí sentada.
Tu pelo se está poniendo como bien largo, rápido, ¿verdad?
Oh my God, yes. Y eso que me lo estoy cortando. Like I've been cutting it myself. Actually, my husband's been helping me too. I've I think it's just because well, since we move so often, it's so hard for me to find someone that I can trust that's not gonna like make the curls like bad.
Right.
But I have given myself a mullet before. So I have to be careful in how I cut it. So I'll do part of it and then my husband will help me kind of trim it on the back so that it's good. So
So
but
are
I
you
think
te lo estás cortando más frecuente?
sí, porque antes esperaba como 6, 8 meses, and now I'm trying to do like every 3 months, at least like the ends. And so I think that that's what's making it grow much longer. And then last time I did it when it was a full moon, and you know how we hear que es bueno cortarse el cabello when it's a full moon. So I was like, "Ooh, let me go cut my hair now."
Mm, Yo
So
creo que
yeah.
eso hace diferencia. Yo me acuerdo que mi abuelita me dijo que nuestra bisabuela hacía lo de crops y todo eso ¿cómo se dice crops en español?
El sembrar,
Sí,
el siembra,
que,
sí,
cuando
cuando
sembraban y
estás
todo eso,
sembrando.
y mucho lo hacían dependiendo de la luna. Y todo eso,
Mm.
basado, porque no tenían la tecnología que tenemos hoy de cuándo y cómo hacerlo, pero ellos sabían cómo hacerlo, pero se guiaban mucho por la luna. Entonces, cuando ella me dijo eso, me identifiqué más con la luna y las estrellas por esa razón, como que I didn't feel crazy thinking that I was
Mhm.
crazy because I was so infatuated with the moon. So
Mhm.
when she told me that, I was like, okay, maybe I'm not crazy. So I just kind of rolled with it. But they just
I
kind
love
of say
that.
that, because the moon has so much energy, the stars, just the earth itself
Mhm.
has so much energy. So it does impact certain things that we do.
Mhm. Yeah,
I guess we'll have to talk
absolutely.
about that one day. We'll have to bring on an expert.
Oh my gosh, yes, that would be amazing. I would love that. I don't know if you
Yeah,
remember too that my second name means goddess of the moon también. So
yeah.
I think that that's what it's this one. Ixchel, that one there.
Excel, yeah. And I have
Uh-huh.
met someone too. They told me to do fasting during the full moon, like the 3 days of the cycle of the moon. And they were saying that the cycle of the moon is very similar to the cycle of a female, in reference to our menstrual cycle as well.
Mm. Oh wow. That's very interesting. Uh-oh. I think is my internet out? I think I might have lost
I think
Viviana.
I think it
Oh,
was
oh,
both
we got
of
back.
us. It happened at the same time. It happened on my end and your end, so I don't know what happened. I think it's because we're talking about the moon, so let's change our topic. La energía está cambiando.
Sí.
Okay, so the universe doesn't want us to talk about that, so let's change the topic. How was your week? Tell me a little bit about your week.
Aside from the beautiful moon, it was a good week. It's been so busy. I think these last 2 months, I think with businesses kind of trying to get everything coordinated and fixed before the end of the new year. I've been getting more, thankfully, more clients, more work, but also definitely being a lot more intentional and focused. So I did a lot of good work this last week. And then yesterday we went to a place called Red Rock Canyon around
Mhm.
here. It's kind of like our version of ¿cómo se llama? Grand Canyon, except
Okay.
it's 20 minutes away for us, and it's beautiful, beautiful. So Drew hadn't got my husband hadn't gotten a chance to go there, and so we all went and we started climbing. You get to kind of go down, and it was really cool because our son is much older now too, so that we can all kind of get a little bit more adventurous with how we were going and exploring. And he really really enjoyed it, to the point where like he was getting a little too comfortable with jumping around the rocks and kind
And
of
then you
going
were a nervous
down.
wreck.
I was, but not really, because Drew was the one that was walking with him, so he's kind of showing him how to balance. And then there was a point where we walked through these two giant boulders, and it was like a really skinny opening. And so I had to like go with my son, and then Drew was like waiting down at the bottom so that he could get like our son at some point and help him down. So it was really fun, adventures. You know me, I like those adventures, and it's nice to be able to start doing more of these and me not being so nervous. I think as my son's getting older too, kind of letting him explore more. And so we did that. And then it's like a 13-mile drive that you can do, like a scenic drive, but then there's spots where you can stop and go down. So we went through the first one, and there's actually even people who were, ¿cómo se llama? Rock climbing in some of the areas that
Mm.
we were going down. So we were like, yeah, we won't do that because obviously that's not our thing. But it was really cool to see the people doing that. And we just kind of went down, explored. We found like a little, I guess from the water, when it was raining, it kind of just puddled up to like a little lake.
Mhm.
Obviously not a place to go swimming, but it was really nice to be able to see that. And just, yeah, different, very different experience. And then we went to another spot, and we just climbed up this like really steep um, boulder, or kind of like from their mountain formations. And it was so nice. And then we got to see all at the arriba and like see the entire view of all the mountains. And it just was
Mm.
so, so peaceful. And I think it's what's so, ¿cómo se dice? It's kind of like perplexing in a way that you're in Vegas, it's a desert, but then you go to this spot and there's trees, there's greenery, and then you see greenery on the mountains nearby. It's not that much, but it was really just nice to kind of be in a area como un little oasis, and seeing plants thrive. And I thought a lot about my dad when we were there, because he's a geophysicist engineer. And so a lot of the things about the rocks and each layer, like I kept thinking about the things that he does. So I picked up some rocks to show my dad.
Oh wow,
Yeah. So yeah, so that
that's
was
pretty
really, really
cool.
fun. Yeah,
Yeah, it's so
really
funny. Like
fun.
this week, I've been exploring like a lot of like trees, like looking at the trees and like analyzing them, and not up close, but just kind of far away.
Hmm.
And it's just, I don't know. Sometimes it feels weird, right? Because it could be like a weird topic to talk about with someone.
Hmm.
Like, I guess when sometimes we think about like tree huggers and how awkward or weird that could be, but if you really like, once you do it yourself or you explore that, like it's kind of like peaceful.
Hmm. It's a release of energy that like you just, and I've heard it even from like indigenous communities saying that there's that connection that you can hug a tree or tell a tree how you feel, and es como que te quita las ansias, the like the anxiety and
Hmm.
all of those things, and you just hug the tree, and then you're just like, oh. I think we talked about it a few shows ago that I told my son to say,
Maybe.
hi, tree, thank you, tree. And it's like such a cool thing to do, because it's kind of
Uh,
like, oh, I acknowledge the tree.
I've never I've never hugged a tree, but I
You have to
like
try it.
trees.
Well, now that you have been more into admiring the trees, just try it. Even if it's just like putting your hand on the tree, just
Yeah,
that connection and taking deep breaths is just, once you try, you'll know it's just
it's
different. And I think
therapeutic. Yeah.
maybe you're the first, yeah. Just don't think about it being weird, because then you're like mentalmente, then you're like, oh, this is too weird. But
Yeah.
yeah, I definitely recommend it.
It's kind of like the same thing where, people have to be close to the water and, to the beach or a river or something like that to feel
Mhm.
that peacefulness. And I know even the ocean has a way of like cleansing itself, right? And then it makes me think of just nature in general, right? So I'm mobile today because I'm in Georgia, and we were just kind of driving down the highway, and I was like, how did all these trees get here, right? Like, who planted the seed? And like, because if you really look at them, sometimes they're very like symmetrical, and the way
Mm.
that in the way that they are. And then there's another tree by my office. It's probably like 2 blocks, and I pass by that tree all the time. And I always look at it, and I just remembered that I had taken a picture of it. And I found the picture on my phone from 2019. And then I took a picture of it this week, and I made the comparison. And
Mhm.
it's really, I had started to not look at the tree the same way because I thought it had gotten ugly. But then I
Mm.
looked at it a little bit more this week, and it's really a very unique tree. And I can see how it has grown. I made a relation to it, to life, right? How the tree
Oh,
compares to how life is, and how the tree has evolved, but you can still tell that it's the same tree. It was kind of,
oh, I love
yeah.
that. I love
Mm.
that like connection and comparison too.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So that was cool. So, oh, and also, what else happened for me this week? My grandmother turned 88 on Thursday. Well, our grandmother turned 88 on
Yes.
Thursday. And that was pretty cool. Just the fact that she's 88, and I'm infatuated with the number 8 because it's like the
Mhm.
money number. So the Asians told me.
Ah.
So she turned 88. And I just think that it's amazing that she really just started using a cane a couple of months ago. And
Mm.
she pushes herself to not use the cane sometimes so that she doesn't end up depending on it. So
Mhm.
I just think it's a blessing to be able, there's so many lessons that are being learned by just her being
Mhm.
around, and she doesn't even realize it.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah,
amazing.
she's been such a hardworking woman from the very beginning. I even remember when she lived in New York that we could never keep up with her. Like she just like sped walk and we had to like run to like keep up with her. She just was like zoom zoom corre aquí vaya. And
Yeah,
yeah, it was
all
always
the
always and
time.
I mhm.
We have
Yeah.
some great genes. So
Yep.
there's one of the things that I kind of wanted to talk about today. There's always like buzzwords, and these buzzwords have been around for a little bit, but the whole DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then recently they started throwing also belonging. So I think they're calling it DEIB, right? At organizations, and then you can also come in contact with this just when everyday life. So I recently took a class. It was a short class, but it has 3 phases to it. So I've completed phase 1. So they kind of talked about race, ethnicity, and culture, and I just found it very interesting. It was a group of about 20 people, and the instructor was a professor from one of the universities here in Virginia, and that's his focus: race, ethnicity, culture, and of course, he talks about DEI all the time. And so, one of the things, so I'm going to read you guys like the textbook definition of culture, right? One of the definitions. So it says, culture is the sum total of ways of living, including behavioral norms, linguistic expressions, styles of communications, patterns of thinking, and beliefs and values of a group large enough to be self sustained and transmitted over time. So just that word alone, that when you hear the word culture, right? And then we also think about race, like what's the difference and like what is it or how do they connect? Sometimes, a lot of the times when we have these conversations, I always envision like a Venn diagram, right? Which is the 2 circles, and then they have the little circle in between that's the overlapping information. So when you hear these 2 words, what do you think about, Nick? A culture and race.
I think sometimes the line is blurred for some people between
Mm-hmm.
the meanings of those. And then I also think that sometimes there is a thought of culture is race and that if you are a part of a certain race or appear to be, then you're part of this culture. Or if you don't look enough like this particular, for example, with Hispanics, we have all sorts of Hispanics. We have Asians or Hispanics and Latinos. We have Asian Latinos. We have Black Latinos or Afro Latinos. We have indigenous descendants or Latinos, and sometimes they don't call themselves Latinos. They just say indigenous communities or indigenous people. So we have such a variety of people. And we also have a lot of people who are white Latinos who, because we do have that descendancy from Europeans, so a lot of people will say, oh, well, you don't look Latino, you don't look Hispanic. And they're basing it off of a race or what they think that someone should look like to define
Hmm.
what their culture and values are. So I feel that that is an issue right now, and it's because it can be so complex, and also not enough people are talking about how there are those differences, that race doesn't necessarily define what you would perceive as someone's culture, and we can't necessarily assume that way too because of how someone looks, that they might be a certain race or that they might belong or not belong to a certain culture. So I feel that there's that. For me, it's more about, to understand it more, we need to have more of those conversations with people. We need to not assume, and really just get to know people from how comfortable they feel talking about that. Because I do think too, there's this notion, especially within the work atmosphere, that you get often, oh, and where are you from? Or, you know, I had someone maybe 6 months ago, really kind, and I know it wasn't meaning ill willed, but she said, "Oh, honey, you have an accent. Where are you from?" And I'm like, I don't think I have an accent, but I didn't take it as like, oh yeah, I told her my whole multicultural Latina story, of all the places that I'm from. But that question keeps popping up for a lot of us who may have an accent. I know with like our parents who have an accent, they'll get that a lot more. But I think that that makes people feel, especially older generations, that they don't belong, that someone's questioning whether they're legal or not, because those questions have come up. And so if we want to learn more about other people, we need to navigate ways to have that conversation of, oh, I'd love to know, tell me more about your family, or, some of your traditions, something where you're not necessarily saying, where are you from? Or if someone says, I'm from the States, I was born here. Oh, okay, great. That's great. You can have a conversation about the city that they're from, where they grew up in, or the state, whichever, but not pressing that. No, no, where are you from? Because we think that they look different to whatever perception people think of. So I think it's definitely removing our own perceptions and our own biases and being aware of that to have these conversations. So that was my very long winded response to that, but I think that it is important to be aware of the differences of both of those. What do you
Yeah.
think? How about you?
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes I don't really get to like think about these profound, topics, but I try to, especially because we do the show and because what I do for a living, I know that I'm able to spread the word about whatever, right? And also because being a Latina entrepreneur, people look at me and they have their, judgments about me, right? And I want to, whether they're positive or negative, I want to be able to be knowledgeable of this topic so that I can school other people, right?
Mhm.
So one of the things that they mentioned in the class was like, who told you that you were what, right? So like, who told you that you're black? Who told you that you're Hispanic or Latino? Who told you that you're Colombian? And when I was in the class, I was with, they kind of put us in groups. So I was with an African American lady that was older, and it was just her and I was able to verbally express because I never had pondered this question, right? And in my family, we really haven't had someone to tell me you're Colombian, or, make sure that you keep, your roots alive or anything like that. We just kind of did life, and we didn't have these deep conversations in my family. So there was never any conversations about racism, oh, don't be friends with them because they're darker than you or because their hair looks a certain color. Those conversations never took place. But just to think about the fact that, who has put us in these boxes, who has put you, um I don't know if you can read the comments in a minute, but thank you, Jessica. We'll respond to your statement in a few seconds. But one of the things that I was thinking about is, why did I decide to comply with the box that people have put me in? Especially here in the United States, or even if I was in my country as well. Why do I accept that? Why have I continued to accept it? One of the ladies that was in the class that was with me, she said, it's like you went for like African Americans, right? So they went from like just being people to being colored to being black to being brown to now being people of color. Like, which one do you go with, and why do you accept these new terms, that are in media? So I was just kind of like fascinated by that a little bit. But in reference to culture and race, I think with race, we kind of, like you said, we judge people because of the way that they look, and sometimes you don't know that you can, like, this Saturday, I was tutoring one of my students, and it was a new student, and it was virtual, and it was my first session with them. And they have a first and last, everybody, well, the two girls that we tutor and the mom, they have a name that sounds Latino to me, right? But I had to catch myself to not ask, because I didn't want to get something in return that maybe I didn't want to hear. So I just didn't ask. um but her last name is like Ingrid Martinez or something like that. And I know even sometimes today we hear a lot of names that sound like they're Latino, but they're not. So just kind of being conscious of the race piece, that just because you look a certain type of way, that's what you are. Because I know, and we've discussed this before, where in a lot of different Latin countries you can look like a gringa, with green eyes and blonde hair, but you could be Dominican and look that way, right? So just kind of being aware of those things. And then the culture piece, one of the things that I was researching was the fact that, culture can change, it can evolve at different times. And I think also through like history and the things that we've been through, like they have a term called cultural assimilation, which is when culture is being forced, or we're being pursued or pushed to change our culture, kind of like when they did with the indigenous people and the Europeans came and they kind of forced them to be, something that they weren't originally. So, and it also makes me think about how when I first came to the United States, we came to New York, and you know how New York has a reputation of the melting pot and the Big Apple and all that stuff. And I just think that's a good example of all the different cultures coming together. And even sometimes within our Latino families and community, we start to, like, I'm Colombian and we don't drink coquito, but because I have a friend that's Puerto Rican and she made coquito, so now I want to include coquito into my cultural traditions as well during the holidays. So I think that that's when we can kind of see the positive of mixing that melting pot and bringing the cultures together. So that's what I think about that.
I
That's
love
my
that.
long-winded one. Yeah, because I think it's good when we could do it for the positive and not do it for the negative piece, right? And I know,
Yeah.
Nick, that you've had, because when you were in Venezuela, you went to, like, I would call it like an international school, right, where you guys mainly spoke only spoke English. So you have been exposed to different cultures as a little girl. I wasn't exposed to it till like later in my life. So what are some cultures that you have seen that you maybe embraced, that or that you have seen those scenarios when people can kind of bring different cultures into one?
Oh man, I love that question. I think that this whole idea of my childhood, and I guess now that I'm much older, I didn't appreciate how lucky I was to grow up in that environment, to go to a school with so much diversity, so much culture. So for me, I questioned so much, why are people embracing other cultures? why are people so trying to put us in boxes? Because for me, that was normal, being around other cultures, being exposed to different foods. I remember some of my childhood friends, they're Korean Venezuelans, and I even remember that I think we were out one time. We probably talked about this on the show. We were out and about. I mean, they're Venezolanas too, so they spoke Spanish, and we were. Both of our parents had stores around the same area. My mom used to have a store, and we would hang out on the few times we were able to. And I remember people were like, "Oh my gosh, hablan español," and they're like, "Yeah, we're Venezuelan." Like, for me, I was like, "Why would you ask that question?" But it was because it was a norm to me. I was exposed to that, thankfully, at a very young age, but it just became normal for me to be accepting and loving of other cultures. We used to also talk that I used to steal their lunches, not necessarily steal, but practically beg for their food, like to see, like, hey, can I have some of your food? And we laugh about it now because they're like, yeah, you'd barely leave me with some of my food. And I just, for me, it was so great to be able to share that. It's almost like what people do nowadays, where they bring potlucks from what their own families or communities, and you kind of come together. I was exposed to that on a daily. So for me, it was just enriching, but also normal. And so I think that it's such a challenge for me to switch that, but also it's exciting for me to share that perspective, to kind of help other people see, like, hey, we can all be different, but we can all learn from everybody. So that, to me, is one of the things that I think has really shaped the work that I do. And I hadn't realized that until, these last few years that I've been really reflecting, like, where is this passion truly like started from? And it was because I was taught in that environment where we were, and thankfully, yeah, we spoke English. That's where I learned English and Spanish. And it was just that multicultural melting pot that I loved as a kid. And I missed that when I moved to the States. That's where I felt we had to be with our own little groups, like, if it's like if you almost had birds and you had to put, the pajaritos with the long tails on one side and then the other birds with the little crests on another. It's kind of like I felt like we were being compartmentalized. And I was like, no, why can't we hang out? So I still, when I was in a sorority, I still hung out with people that were from different communities. I think when you had visited me one time, we went to a party from an Indian fraternity that I was friends with. And for me, like, those were things that I love doing. So I think that that's just so important for us to, it might not be comfortable for people to immerse themselves in such different cultures. I mean, I had friends from Nigeria, I had friends from Japan, China, Korea, Venezuelans, a lot of American friends too. And we all kept in touch, friends from India. And it was really, really cool how all of us, and we still talk about that it was normal for us to be in that environment of celebrating one another, and how we miss that still to this day because it does feel like it's not the same. So I definitely think that, and then the terms of when you were talking about earlier how we have these perceptions or of what someone's last name might, be Hispanic or not. So when you were saying to not try to make that assumption if it sounds like a Spanish last name, I've been trying to do that as well. One of the things that I have learned too is that there's a lot of Filipinos who have Spanish last names because of, their history too. So a lot of them are Filipino. So, like, I try not to make that. So I usually try to wait for them to say something. I might say a word or two in Spanish to kind of give people the cue, like, hey, I speak Spanish, and kind of keep it open. And if I don't see them feeling comfortable to switch to speaking Spanish, I'm like, okay, great. They might not speak Spanish. And I try not to go through it where when I first moved here, anyone that I perceive them as they're Latinos or Hispanic, I'll start speaking Spanish and they'll be like, oh, I don't speak Spanish. I'm like, oh, okay, why not? And then so my perspective has changed. But yeah. And I do want to, before I forget, address Jessica. Thank you so much for watching us live.
Yes.
I do remember you. And she had talked about how her name is Jessica Lynn Rios Almanza, never married, rather. Oh, thank you so much to our fantastic producer for putting it back up. And I love how she said that the cultural aspect of my personal history and culture is present in my name. I am a Mexican and very all American here. Nice combo. I need to see you live here. I love how you had said that you are Mexican, but you're also very all American, because I think that that is one of the conversations that happens a lot within our cultures and our communities, that we're having to pick one or the other. You know, if we were born here or we were not born here, do we still have our heritage? Do we lose it? All these things that are kind of being told, like you were talking about earlier, like who is telling us these stories, who is telling us who or what we should be, or where we connect with, or what our culture is, when it's ourselves, you know, our families, the traditions that we have ourselves. So I love that you fully embrace 100% of who you are, or 200%. I've heard people say I'm 100% Mexican and 100% American. So I'm a 200% person. And I love that. So I really do think that we should all live in our cultural truth and not feel like we need to assimilate. I think that that assimilation is more harmful than we realize. And I think that that has a lot to do with our ancestors or our older generations who came here before us, and that because there was so much more biasness, that they felt, well, we don't want to teach them the language so they can learn English and really blend in. We don't want them to, you know, showcase their culture, their traditions. And it was all of these things where we were being stripped our identity in hopes of fitting in, but in the reality, you can't take something that's part of, like, your, in my personal opinion, part of your DNA. It's like asking you to just have a missing body part just so that you can fit in, or something that's like from your soul. So I feel like that's very, very important. And how we embrace who we are. And I think no one has the right to tell us what we should or should not be. I think in the al contrario, in the other, in how do we say al contrario in English?
On the other hand,
On the other hand, yes, thank you.
where's Maddie when you need her? She knows all the vocabulary words.
She's our good in between. Um, so on the other hand, I think it should be more of us expressing ourselves, who we are fully, and not feeling like I have to hide this or not say this. I've learned to embrace, like, when I forget a word in English or in Spanish, because this, it happens, like I'm like, oh, this is the word I'm trying to say, and then I'll go and explain, and now I don't feel ashamed about that. So I think that that's so important that we embrace that. So yeah, and Jessica was sharing that the story was, she heard a similar story too, that they didn't let her mom learn Spanish. Yes, I've heard, especially in Texas. I know when I moved in
Mhm.
San Antonio, that was my husband's father was born in San Antonio, and he would get beat for speaking Spanish. And the more people that, once I was making friends there, the more people that I heard from that had been from the older generations, it was the same story, that they would get beat in school for speaking Spanish. And so, yeah, it was that forced assimilation. And I think that while thankfully that has definitely changed in school systems, there's still that uh como se dice, it's not as prominent, but it's kind of like subtle, it's subconscious or
Mhm.
unconscious assimilation, that we still feel this need to strip our identities and who we are, and in order to fit. And I think one of the things that I personally feel that the African American or Black communities have done is that they have been so tired of having to strip their identity and hide who
Mhm.
they are, that they have become so vocal, that they've been the ones that I feel have been teaching us that we can be fully 100% ourselves, and that we shouldn't hide our identities to conform to whatever this notion is. And I think that at the when we really think about it, we from all sorts of races have this subconscious bias line that we feel like has been there, and no one's really making that effort to remove it. It's just one of the things, kind of like, oh, it's always been done this way, but why not shift it? So it's change is always hard for some people, but when we know that it's not really going to help anyone, why not start to change? Why not start to really kind of open our eyes? And really, for me, it's just celebrating our differences in a way that we can learn so much from one another. I think one of the best ways to put it is, if you're in a business set environment, you can bring people who are engineers, artists, designers, marketers. You bring people from all different backgrounds and different brains, that their brains have different functions of how they work, and you make people work together to build this company. So why can't we think of our cultures and our identities in that way, where we can still share so much more and have even bigger impact if we start to think about our who we are in that way, and our identities being a superpower in a way, instead of a damper, or like, oh, you're from there, I can't, like, you and I, you're Colombian, you're 100% Colombian, I am half Colombian, and I feel like there's still that part of me that I want to learn more from my Colombian side and more of my heritage. But it's never been like, oh, you're Colombian, I'm a multicultural mutt, we can't hang out. Like, of course we're family, but it's never been that way. So if we can start to shift that way of thinking, I feel that there can be more of these conversations, that like the ones we have in our show.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think it's happening a lot more in the workplace, but it's not happening at homes. It's not happening, in places where it should be happening. Like even in the school system, I'm not sure how much it's happening. Maybe it happens more in like tri-state areas or just larger areas, but I just think that it's part of the prevention, right? So as you start to see, I'm assuming the leaders of the, let's say, educational system see trends of increased percentages of Latinos, Asians, whatever the culture is. And I just think that they need to do a better job in reference to preparing themselves for those multicultural families that come into play, and not start to implement things once you already have, you know, 30-40% of your students are from this particular culture, and then the teachers can't communicate properly with the families, or they're not aware of the different cultures. And for us not to have any phobias against learning about any other cultures or race or ethnicity or even disabilities that people may have, like we have to learn how to deal with those things. In reference to even disabilities, like how do you handle someone that, let's say you're a owner of an apartment complex, like how do you handle someone that is blind, or how do you handle someone that has some type of disability that is not obvious, that you're not on a wheelchair, that you're not walking with a cane to help to guide you to walk. So any of those things, and just being conscious of those things. um like I'm telling you, like when I took this class, and it was only like 3-4 days,
Mhm.
but and again, it's just part one of it. There's like four different parts, but it just kind of opened up my eyes, because um I was I knew that it existed, but I because I don't come in contact with it. But now that I'm aware of it, I'm conscious of it, and then I'm able to talk about it more, and I can implement it at my workplace as well, which I think it's something that's necessary. And to have these conversations with my children, because even
Mhm.
sometimes with children that might have insecurities because they're short, or because they wear glasses, or whatever it may be. So it just creates, because I think that at home we should be having these conversations with our children, right? To say, hey, because there's a lot of bullying going around, or like my son plays basketball for the high school team, but maybe he's looking down on a kid that didn't make the team. So it created for him and I to have conversations about being sensitive to other people's feelings and emotions. I know sometimes, and we've talked about this before, where people have like mama jokes and stuff like that. But
Mm.
sometimes you're not aware that this kid's mom probably passed away and you're doing mama jokes. Even though we've been saying mama jokes, for years, we should still kind of like be sensitive to it. Or if you do happen to say a mama joke, to just watch the room and see how somebody reacted, because maybe you should just stop. you know um and I think it's about that, as Maddie would say, educating ourselves and seeking some of this information so that you're socially aware, culturally aware, and then just spread the news with other people. Because I think one of the things is fear, where people are fearful to ask us, like, how do you ask Nick de, like, what are you? Like, what's your race, or what's your ethnicity, or like they don't even say, well, what vocabulary to use not to offend you. And I just think that we need to learn to use the correct vocabulary. And again, and if the vocabulary is being used towards us and is the wrong vocabulary, to not become offensive, but to really educate people, and to kind of tell them how it goes. Or because people have asked me that a couple of times, like, I don't want to insult you, but blah, they say whatever. So I'm like, that's cool, but maybe next time you should say it like this, ABCD. um so it doesn't happen to me a lot, but sometimes people that are not aware, especially because in the area where I live, people are a little bit more conscious now, but before, they just didn't know what I was. They just knew that I wasn't black, and they knew that I wasn't white, and they were like, what is she? And they were afraid to ask. So I just think it's that, just educating, and then just making sure that we let our children or young people be aware of it. Even though I think we underestimate young people because they're very accepting of everything. Because even, and also, again, to educate ourselves, because one thing that I learned was that apparently in Jamaica there's a lot of Chinese heritage there as well. So there's some people that call themselves Chinese Chinese Jamaicans, because there's so many of them, and that's not something that I knew. So I just think it's good for us to intentionally try to learn something new about culture, because the more people start to mix the cultures and the races, we really need to kind of be aware of it. And if we're not aware, just be open when it's presented in front of us. um One thing that I like, Nick, that this week I saw your Instagram post about you and your son working on the artificial intelligence, and how you created some of those images. And it just made me think about just how he expresses himself, and how you were able to put that into technology. And that could also be connected to culture, right? Because of all the different colors. And you could do this in Spanish and in English and in different language and in different languages to create this image. So I thought that was pretty cool. Tell me a little bit about that experience with him.
Yeah, I love that you said that. I think that was kind of serendipitous, like spur of the moment thing. I kind of wanted to do something that pulled him away from, he loves Minecraft, which is great, like he learns how to build things and he's actually done some really cool things. But I was trying to get him away from having a device so close to his face, and I needed to do some work. And so I was like, oh, I actually wanted to showcase how to do this. Let me bring him on and have him help me. But what I wanted to do was let him be free in his way of thinking. And I think that you said something really powerful that I think young kids, even when I see them in playgrounds, they don't see, they're not as, I think when we get into adults, that's when we kind of build more of these biases, or they learn from their parents, these biases. But you see kids not really, you know, um, separated, or you don't see the hate, like you see them mixing and mingling. And I think one of the things I had recently seen my son encounters, that some kids were saying ew to his food. And it wasn't like I put anything culturally for him. I just made a sandwich que tenía aguacate, or like avocado on it. And they had said ew, and he felt so embarrassed he didn't eat his food. So I'm like, oh great, now I have to navigate this part and it wasn't anything like that's our ethnic food. So, but it all stems to what children are exposed to. So when we were doing this test, I think it was more about me letting him explore his creativity, but also finding opportunities, see, oh, look at this person, and like showcasing diversity and making sure that whatever initially when we were doing the prompts, some of them you saw they came out super whacked. They were so funny, especially the ones with the cows and the rainbow pizzas, and it just was so funny. And we put out the full video on our YouTube channel, and it was so great just to not seek perfection in that moment. And I think that that's what applies not just in life, but in cultures, in what we feel or we perceive someone of a certain culture should be. It's like perfection. They should embody whatever it is that we think or people project onto it. So I think it was just being in the moment, experiencing and letting him come up with these ideas. And then I was like, oh, look at this part here. Look at this part here. Oh, that doesn't look normal. So, kind of like showcasing little things like that and making sure that if anything that came out that might have, which I didn't see anything with, when you're doing AI, I'm always cautious about people and how they end up showing up. Nothing came out biased, which is one of the reasons why I personally prefer using Adobe Firefly, because of the training module that they use to create these images is actually not, como say, scanning the internet like these other model. And they're using it from licensed stock royalty free assets to train. So they have been very intentional about trying to navigate these biases, or if something does come up, making sure that that's flagged. So doing that process was not only fun, but it was a great opportunity to just be in the moment and test those out. So now I kind of want to go in and use this as a great opportunity to show him some of the culture or some of, things that we might eat or foods, or, kind of see what that creates. Because I think what I'm starting to see now, because he's at a certain age and he doesn't go to a school that has Spanish in the class. Like when we were in Texas, it was different. There was some Spanish, but here, even though there is a big Hispanic and Latino community, it's not really, there's no after school classes for that. So I think he's in that mode where he doesn't see English, or he sees English as a primary language and not Spanish. He flipped. He was really interested in Spanish a few months ago, and now like he flipped back. So it is learning to not let this, I think it's subconscious assimilation, like what he sees his peers doing, that he wants to
Right.
mimic. So bringing that, and then I think one of the things too, to go back to you, Viviana, that I thought was really powerful that you mentioned is teaching them to be aware of the surroundings. Of when you were mentioning a joke, if a kid, they get older and they start saying these jokes, reading the room, being aware of this person might not feel good, or this person might have been hurt because someone said something, and then learning to be more aware of that. I think that's one of the most powerful soft skills, which I think is more of a skill that everyone should learn to have in life, is to kind of be self-aware or be aware of what others might be feeling, or if they're quiet, trying to bring others into our space, or honor them, or give them like el apoyo, not leave them behind. There's just so many things that I think that we, especially here in the US, we are so go, 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 trabajo, trabajo, work, 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 that we kind of walk with like blinders, and if it's like, if it doesn't affect us, then we don't see it as an issue, which I think that there's so much more we could do if we can try to make a difference with things that, like accessibility. I think that's one of the conversations that are so important to have when it's about design, equity, and inclusion, but it's not necessarily included in that conversation, which is a big, big issue, we because something doesn't affect us does not mean that we shouldn't create these spaces, or making sure that we can have more accessible websites, accessible content, create designs that are a lot more legible, all these things, we can still do that to have that impact. So I feel like there's just so many layers of what we can do. It is just picking, I think, a few things and trying to really, if it's something that people aren't comfortable with, drive that so that you could start working on other avenues. What do you think?
Definitely. I met a young, not a young lady, but a lady this in the last 2 weeks, and she has been an advocate for people with disabilities. So she, and I really haven't paid attention again because I don't have an obvious disability, right? But she's on a wheelchair, and she has worked with her city to make sure that the word handicap is not being used. So
Mhm.
in the city where we live, um the the spaces for them is, it just says reserved parking. It has like, it has the wheelchair icon, but it just says reserved parking. It doesn't use the word handicap anymore. So she has been an advocate because she went through a situation and she's now in a wheelchair. She decided to be an advocate and also to educate other people about her lifestyle and how she's just like everybody else. It's just that she's in a wheelchair. So just having that, I mean, it made me think about that when you were talking. And then also the other part that you were talking about, the jokes with the kids and stuff like that, also to teach our children that if they do happen to offend someone, like, what can you do to apologize to that person or to make the situation better, to show, like, I'm a human being, I made a mistake, like, my bad, or pull them to the side, but just kind of know, because we're all going to be in situations that we either do or say something that maybe was inappropriate. So how do we get out of that and still not, make that person feel some type of way, but still kind of smooth it out so that people don't forget that we're human beings, and that we make mistakes, or that we weren't aware of, something that was said or done that offended them. So I think that's important too. Lately, I've been big on that lately, the last year or so, in reference to letting my biological children say, like, I'm a human being, like, I made mistakes, I'm a mother, and I'm still learning how to do it. And I saw a post the other day, I think it was on Instagram, and it was just saying, like, it's nice to, like, don't lose the fact that your mother is also living life for the first time. So it just kind of brought reality to me, because sometimes we see people that are older than us, or like my mother or my father, and I think that they should be doing certain things because it's my mom. Like, you shouldn't be doing that, but I have to realize that she's doing life just like I am. So I just thought that that was pretty interesting, and that's the part about having empathy for other people. I think Mark said something like, when we were talking about African Americans, he said that some African Americans don't know which country they're from. So that's one of the sins from slavery, right? So the inheritance and where we come from, and the race and the culture and ethnicity, all that stuff. And I just think that we need to be conscious and aware of those things, when it comes to race, and being sensitive to everybody's background and experiences. ¿Verdad?
I agree, and I think you said something that was so powerful, that in the power of acknowledging when we make a mistake and saying, "Hey, I'm so sorry, I made a mistake. I didn't mean for that to sound that way." I think it's really hard for some people to admit they've made a mistake, but I think that that is where no le agregas fuego a la leña. Like, you don't
Add
feed the fire.
fire to it. Mhm.
Yeah, you acknowledge, and yeah, it might take more to de-escalate a moment where it might have just been really something really bad, like in work environments where you see those um, biases show up, or things like that. But I think that that's at least a starting step to admitting, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to sound this way. And I think it does start with our children learning to be more like that, because it is once we get into the adult, you have to be very conscious of wanting to make that change. And some people don't like to make that change, or it takes It takes them a lot. So I think that if we can be more like that, we can learn more and I think grow more. And I love how you said that we need to remember that our elders are still living life, you know, for the first time. And when you were saying that, I was like, that is actually a really beautiful way to put it, because while we think that they're older, yes, they're older than us, but there's people older than them. And then they're still living every new experience in that age that they are. So it's a new day, new experience for them. So it's a really great way that you put that in the perspectives that we have, and how we try to catch ourselves when we're being judgmental and not projecting, and
Mm-hmm.
empathetic and saying, okay, this is the way that, yeah, we can react, and it can go really bad because it's a reaction over reaction, and then it's like, you did this, I did this, la la la. And then if we can just de-escalate that, and have those conversations, and also being say candid, like, hey, I didn't mean to say, like, if I told you something, Viviana, I'm so sorry, I made a mistake, I didn't mean for it to sound that way. If I said something that was inappropriate or, biased, can you please help me educate myself? How could I say this better? And it's like you said, some people, it's hard to find the right person to feel comfortable to say that to ask them to kind of help you. And there are some
Mm-hmm.
people I know within the Black communities, I've had friends saying that they are tired of educating people. They just want people to understand. And so they, have had different perspectives or different scenarios where they might encounter that so often that they're drained from doing that. So it's, again, going back to reading the room, and not everyone will be comfortable to do that, but educating ourselves. I think that that's the whole component, and not not taking things personal in the sense where, if we can understand that someone might not necessarily be rude, like I was telling you earlier with that person that was, I know she wasn't being mean on purpose. I
Right.
didn't make a big deal about it. I said, oh, okay, this is where I was like, oh, okay, because you generally just wanted to know about who I was, where I was from. And so I didn't, I could have reacted and said something, but what would that have done? It wouldn't
Right.
have
Right. Right.
done anything good, because I knew she just wanted to talk about, we were talking about culture before then.
Right.
So okay, she just wants to know. So yeah,
Right.
reading the
And
room.
and it's part of reading the room, like you were saying earlier. And I think it's okay to want to be with our own culture. Like that's why we have Little Italy or Chinatown or Havana. There's a city in Miami, Little Havana, or just little places that are, like you would think that only Italians can go to Little Italy, but no, a lot of people from that are not Italians want to go to Little Italy because the food is amazing, or whatever. So I just think it's okay to indulge in your own. And I think it's amazing to be able to be embraced by other cultures, that you can come into my space as well and experience my space. And I
Mhm.
think too, in reference to the educational piece, Sesame Street has done a good job, and I would encourage you to look at Nick there, look at Sesame Street, like videos on YouTube, because they, in the last 2-3 years, they have really kept up with the culture and diversity topic for children. So I encourage you to do that. And, just let's just like embrace each other and just be open minded, and don't be so quick to respond, when somebody does or says something, and just kind of like be silent for a second and just kind of think it through before you can respond. And if, like, somebody's grandmother said, if you have nothing nice to say, don't say nothing at all.
Mhm.
So that's definitely an option. So
Yeah.
our time is up.
No.
Maddie's not here today, but we still have a poem, of course. And did you have any closing stuff to say, Nick, there before we listen to our poem of the day?
This this conversation was great, as always, as we always have. We missed you, Maddie. We're thinking about
Yes.
you and your daughter,
Yeah.
and this was good. And I hope you have a safe drive on the go, Viviana. with
Yes.
your car office.
Oh my goodness. Yes. And I just want to say thank you to Jessica for your comments. That was pretty
Yes.
cool. Enrique, he said wepa to us. And Maddie also just made a comment. She said, love you ladies and thank you. It takes courage to admit we are wrong, to emphasize with others. Remember, we don't get to tell others how to feel. So if you hurt, I am sorry that was not my intent, and that's growth. So yes, definitely thank you, Maddie, for that. And anybody else that may have missed that's watching us today, I just want to say thank you for being so dedicated to us, and of course spread the word that we're here, and that we're here just to kind of have transparent, healthy conversations about whatever we talk about.
Yes.
And I hope you have a great week. Maddie, Mark, we're ready for that poem when you're ready.
My feels all day, well, since yesterday, so I'm just gonna read today. So click, click, pose. Look closely. Can you see the void beneath the surface? In the eyes, the empty spaces, loneliness, screaming, crying, losing hope, begging for someone to notice, barely hanging on. A smile. It's what happens right before the break. Before the beast tears off my chest, the constant battle with this demon who threatens to drown me whole. I try to loosen from his grip. I swim up to the surface, hoping to get to breathe. Pose. For a second, I try hard to forget how the weight of the world pulls me down. At night, I can't sleep. Nightmares on Elm Street. I stay awake thinking of ways to stay alive, yet I close my eyes. I lay in a postpartum state, so when the Grim Reaper finds me, his job is more than halfway done. I am done, but I survive. For some strange reason, I get to do it again. It's Groundhog's Day, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday. They all feel the same. I feel the same exact pain. I cast a lifeline into the world in desperate mode. Click, click, pose. My brain, unsteady, like an elephant walking a tightrope, scattered puzzle pieces that can't seem to make a coherent thought. I think of Chesley, attorney, spokesperson, Miss USA, who had her shit together and still she killed herself. From the 29th floor, she jumped. Depression knows no gender, socioeconomic status. Hurt is hurt. Some can voice it better. Others get lost in the waves. Most days, I surf. It is on those better days I take selfies instead of asking for help. You never know what's been brewing when someone is in a dark place. So when you see those selfies, don't just click on the picture. Check on your strong friends.
You know that little voice in your head? The one that tells you to ignore a tasteless joke.
one that tells you to keep quiet when a client makes a racist comment.
The little voice that tells you you're not smart enough because English isn't your first language.
Or that it's okay to judge someone for leaving early because they have family commitments.
The one that tells you not to say anything when others are being reduced to stereotypes.
Or that it's not a big deal when everyone's opinion isn't considered.
You may think you're the only one that hears that voice, but that voice also speaks to other people. It says, "You're different.
You're an outsider.
You lack commitment.
Your opinion doesn't matter."
Instead of listening to that little voice, you need to find yours and make it heard. It's time for all of us to speak up. Because when we change the dialogue, we can change our world.
Islands are home to some of the most incredible plants and animals on our planet, but invasive species threaten them and their island homes, causing extinction and harm to our wildlife, oceans, and communities. That's where island conservation comes in. We restore islands for thriving biodiversity, healthy oceans, and resilient communities worldwide by removing invasive species. Join us in protecting our world's islands and oceans. Learn more and support island conservation today. Island Conservation, restoring islands for wildlife, oceans, and communities.
We've all seen it happen. Something is said. It's supposed to be a joke. But really it's a hurtful insult.
And you can see the victim really feels it, feels diminished, feels excluded.
So what's the answer? You'll get used to it. It's just the way they are.
No. Don't accept that. And don't accept, what's this got to do with you? This doesn't affect you. It affects us all. If there's poison in the water, there's poison in the water.
If you hear someone being diminished, be an ally. If you see someone being excluded, be an ally.
If someone's voice needs amplifying, be an ally. If people need educating, be an ally.
Just by speaking up, an ally can make a huge difference. You let everyone know that it's not okay. And you let the person know that we, all of us, are on their side. That we don't accept this, so they don't have to. Be an ally. All you have is your voice, but that's all it takes.
Are just so impressed with them. Like I said, we've been with them for years. I will recommend and refer anyone to them. We stand by A+ academics. They're the best.
A+ tutorial really did help me with all my grades. They all went up when I came to this place. And I would say I recommend this school to everyone.
So it's a really good environment to be in, especially for me because it makes me look up to my parents.
If you have students that need academic help, A+ Academics is the place to be.
A+ Academics, what a great place to go for academics.
It's just a really great place to learn.